Hello. Today we're going to discuss and read A Pair of Silk Stockings by Kate Chopin. This is a short story that was written in 1896 and published in Vogue magazine in 1897. So it's during the Victorian era, which was from 1837 to 1901. So towards the end of the Victorian era. So we're going to read this short story. I've already highlighted some theme ideas. Remember, the theme idea is that generic theme word that could be like love or revenge. And then a theme statement tells us what the writer is trying to say about that word. So our theme ideas for A Pair of Silk Stockings are gender roles, consumerism / escapism, the social class or belonging, and subverting the male gaze. Okay, so let's start with gender roles. When we talk about gender roles in the Victorian period, in the 1800s, there was this concept of women that was called the angel at the hearth or the angel in the house. And so this idea of a woman is this raised idea, like she is a saint. She is an ideal woman or the essence of womanhood. She is expected to be soothing and comforting and self-sacrificing, submissive to her husband, kind, encouraging, selfless, like an angel, right? Like a perfect person in their idea, that she would nourish and raise her children and devote herself completely to them and give up any sense of needing anything for herself because it all goes to her family. So this idea of the angel at the hearth. Then the other contradictory idea which goes with it, which is a little bit odd, is that women were also infantilized, which was like they were treated not as a full adult. And if you think of all the responsibilities they had, which included managing money and rearing the children and the moral teaching of their children, the morality, it's strange to also infantilize them, but that's what they are. So a woman is never a fully realized person. She is this idealized saint, but that has an innocence of heart that makes her like a child and should be protected by her husband or by the patriarchal figures around her. Okay. Hello. I needed to insert something else that I forgot to say, and I wanted to make sure that I say. So during the Victorian era, a woman was expected to get married, and if she did not get married, she had no social status. An unmarried woman was seen as being useless, rebellious for wanting to work outside the home. An unmarried woman had no security and no real way of like making money. So you were expected to get married, and you were expected to get married for security or like for money, because there was nothing else you could do. And if you tried to go a different route, it probably wouldn't work out well. So we don't even know if Mrs. Summers married for love, although maybe she did because she married down. And you would think that she would have married on the same level or married up if she was not marrying for love. But in any case, it's expected for a woman to get married and raise her children and not to have any other desires or needs or cares besides doing those two things. And now back to your regularly scheduled program. So you're going to see that idea is going to come into play in this short story. And then we'll talk about it as we go. I've highlighted stuff, but I may just read through it all the way or just stop once or twice. I don't want to stop at every single place I've highlighted, and then I'll discuss towards the end. All right, A Pair of Silk Stockings by Kate Chopin. Little Mrs. Summers one day found herself the unexpected possessor of $15. And I will stop here and say $15 was approximately $460 for 2020 terms. So a good chunk of money, not a small amount of money. It seemed to her a very large amount of money, and the way in which it stuffed and bulged her worn-out portemonnaie gave her a feeling of importance, such as she had not enjoyed for years. And that's a purse. I've highlighted that. The question of investment was one that occupied her greatly. For a day or two she walked about, apparently in a dreamy state, but really absorbed in speculation and calculation. She did not wish to act hastily, to do anything she might regret afterwards. But it was during the still hours of the night, when she lay awake, revolving plans in her mind, that she seemed to see her way clear toward a proper and judicious use of the money. $1 or $2 should be added to the price usually paid for Janie's shoes, which would ensure their lasting an appreciable time longer than they usually did. She would buy so and so many yards of percantile and new shirt-waist for the boys and Janie and Mag. She had intended to make the old ones do by skillful patching. Mag should have another gown. She had seen some beautiful patterns, veritable bargains, in the shop windows. And still there would be left enough for new stockings, 2 pairs apiece. And what darning that would save for a while. She would get caps for the boys and sailor hats for the girls. The vision of her little brood looking fresh and dainty and new for once in their lives excited her and made her restless and wakeful with anticipation. All right, so I'm going to highlight some of the responsibilities that she has. She is thinking about how to spend this money for her family, for her children. She has to patch their clothing, like sew up holes. Darning is also a form of sewing up holes, but in stockings. She's worked out all of these very practical ways to use the money on shoes and shirts and clothes for the kids. And it does point out that they would be dressed nicely for once in their lives. So we have here this idea of a woman who works very hard, taking care of her family. They don't have a lot of money. And at one time, she did have money before she got married, because it says a feeling of importance she had not enjoyed for years. So before she got married, and the very next line here we haven't said yet, the neighbors sometimes talked of certain better days. So she, what was called married down. She was in a higher class and a wealthier class and married Mr. Summers, who had less money than her parents. The neighbors sometimes talked of certain better days that little Mrs. Summers had known before she had ever thought of being Mrs. Summers. She herself indulged in no such morbid retrospection. She had no time, no second of time, to devote to the past. The needs of the present absorbed her every faculty. A vision of the future came like some dim, gaunt monster, sometimes appalled her, but luckily tomorrow never comes. Okay, so Mrs. Summers is separated from the society she used to live in. It says her neighbors talked of better days. So she is separated from them because they're talking behind her back. But she doesn't focus on the past. She doesn't think about it because it would be depressing. That morbid retrospection is like sad, and morbid is like gives the image of death. And it says she needs all of her energy to deal with the issues of today, and she also doesn't think about the future, because that seems like it could also be a dim and gaunt monster. So her family lives day to day. They don't have any financial security. She's doing everything she can to take care of them where they are. Mrs. Summers was one who knew the value of bargains, who could stand for hours making her way inch by inch toward the desired object that was selling below cost. She could elbow her way if need be. She had learned to clutch a piece of goods and hold it and stick to it with persistence and determination till her turn came to be served, no matter when it came. So she has to, when she goes shopping, she fights for those bargains. Think of like Black Friday. She's out there throwing elbows, holding on to the thing that she's buying. She really knows how to stretch their money. She's a resourceful person. But that day, she was a little faint and tired. She had swallowed a light luncheon. No, when she came to think of it, between getting the children fed and the place righted and preparing herself for the shopping bout, she had actually forgotten to eat any luncheon at all. She sat herself upon a revolving stool before a counter that was comparatively deserted, trying to gather strength and courage to charge through an eager multitude that was besieging breastworks of shirting and figured lawn. An all-gone limp feeling had come over her, and she rested her hand aimlessly on the counter. So some of her responsibilities again, keeping the children fed, cleaning up the house. She was getting ready to go shopping. She uses fighting and military terms when talking about her shopping responsibilities. So preparing herself for the shopping bout. A bout is a fight or a struggle. And then she had to gather strength and charge, like an army charges, through the multitude that was besieging, another military term. Breastworks of shirting, and breastworks is like a barrier, like a defensive barrier. So all of this military imagery of how hard the work is to go shopping. This isn't pleasure shopping when she goes bargain hunting. She's working hard, and that's why she feels faint. She hasn't eaten anything, and she's already worn out. She wore no gloves. I know that's one sentence, but I'm going to stop there. So this is an example of how she puts her family above herself. She doesn't spend money on herself. It was fashionable for women to wear gloves in this time, and she doesn't. By degrees, she grew aware that her hand had encountered something very soothing, very pleasant to touch. She looked down to see that her hand lay upon a pile of silk stockings. A placard nearby announced that they had been reduced in price from $2.50 to $1.98. All right, so it's a sale. It's 20% off. And a young girl who stood behind the counter asked if she wished to examine their line of silk hosiery. She smiled, just as if she had been asked to inspect a tiara of diamonds with the ultimate view of purchasing it. So silk stockings to her is as likely for her to get as a tiara, as a crown of diamonds. Both of them feel equally out of reach. But she went on feeling the soft, sheeny, luxurious things with both hands now, holding them up to see them glisten and feel them glide serpent-like through her fingers. And so that's an allusion to the Garden of Eden, where the serpent tempts Eve. So these silk stockings are a temptation for her. 2 hectic blotches come suddenly into her pale cheeks. So she blushes. So is she blushing because she's embarrassed? She's excited? She's ashamed? Is it an image of red sin on her pale cheeks? We know she blushes. She looked up at the girl. Do you think there are any 8.5 among these? There were any number of 8.5. In fact, there were more than that of that size than any other. Here was a light blue pair, there were some lavender, some all black, and various shades of tan and gray. Mrs. Summers selected a black pair and looked at them very longingly and closely. She pretended to be examining their texture, which the clerk assured her was excellent. $1.98, she amused aloud. Well, I'll take this pair. She handed the girl a $5 bill and waited for her change and for her parcel. What a very small parcel it was! It seemed lost in the depths of her shabby old shopping bag. So she's had this moment of luxury, the softness of the silk stockings, but already we had come back to this image of the shabby old shopping bag, so back to the normal reality. So if we're thinking about retail therapy, her escape didn't last very long. It was just a moment for that particular purchase. Mrs. Summers, after that, did not move in the direction of the bargain counter. She took the elevator, which carried her to the upper floor into the region of the ladies' waiting rooms. Here, in a retired corner, she changed her cotton stockings for the new silk ones which she had just bought. She was not going through any acute mental process or reasoning with herself, nor was she striving to explain to her satisfaction the motive of her action. She was not thinking at all. She seemed for the time to be taking a rest from the laborious and fatiguing function, and to have abandoned herself to some mechanical impulse that directed her actions and freed her of responsibility. So this is that image of escapism through consumerism. She's not thinking anymore. She's not overthinking, calculating, working, figuring everything out. She's just enjoying this moment. How good was the touch of raw silk on her flesh! She felt like lying back in the cushioned chair and reveling for a while in the luxury of it. She did for a little while. Then she replaced her shoes, rolled the cotton stockings together, and thrust them into her bag. After doing this, she crossed straight over to the shoe department and took her seat to be fitted. So this image of luxury again, we have words like raw silk and flesh and luxury and cushion chair. So all these ideas of richness and luxury. She was fastidious, meaning that she was very attentive to and concerned about accuracy and detail. She was very specific. The clerk could not make her out. He could not reconcile her shoes with her stockings, and she was not too easily pleased. So he's confused because her shoes are all beat up and look like they're in bad condition, but her stockings are fancy, and she's acting like she is a wealthy person because she's not easily pleased. She held back her skirts and turned her feet one way and her head another as she glanced down at the polished, pointed-tipped boots. Her foot and ankle looked very pretty. She could not realize that they belonged to her and were part of herself. She wanted an excellent and stylish fit, and she told the young fellow who served her, and she did not mind the difference of $1 or $2 in the price, as long as she got what she desired. So if you see here the object, the shoes, confer on her beauty. It said that her foot and ankle looked very pretty because she had stylish shoes on. So we're back to this consumerism and escapism. And she said that she couldn't realize that this was a part of herself. And then down here it says she doesn't mind spending a little money as long as she got what she desired. So this is one of the first times that she has chosen to please herself instead of her husband or her children. It was a long time since Mrs. Summers had been fitted with gloves. On rare occasions, when she bought a pair, they were always bargains. So cheap it would have been preposterous and unreasonable to have expected them to be fitted to the hand. So again, not spending money on herself, mostly doesn't buy gloves at all, but when she does, they don't necessarily fit. Now, she rested her elbow on the cushion of the glove counter, and a pretty, pleasant young creature, delicate and deft of touch, drew a long-wristed kid over Mrs. Summer's hand. So a kid here means a kid glove, which are gloves that are made from goat skin. They're very soft and pliable. Up here we have the word cushion, another image of luxury. So we definitely have a motif of luxury going through the story. Even the woman the young lady who's waiting on her is pretty and pleasant and delicate. So like there's even beauty in the person who's waiting on her. She smoothed it down over the wrist and buttoned it neatly, and both lost themselves for a second or two in admiring contemplation of the little symmetrical gloved hand. All right, so together they're enjoying this moment of pleasure, of having a beautiful object. The symmetrical gloved hand, again, makes Mrs. Summers seem like she's in a higher class. So we've got her foot and ankle look very pretty. Now her hand is gloved and symmetrical. So each part of her is being transformed by this shopping trip. So she's changing into an upper class woman for this moment, or at least escaping to it. But there were other places where money might be spent. So we're going to keep on with our shopping spree. There were books and magazines piled up in the windows of a stall a few paces down the street. Mrs. Summers bought 2 high-priced magazines, such as she had been accustomed to read in the days when she had been accustomed to other pleasant things. So again, she used to be rich before she was married, and so now she's indulging in some magazines that she usually wouldn't have bought. She carried them without wrapping, so maybe showing them off a little bit. As well as she could lift her skirts at the crossings. Her stockings and boots and well-fitted gloves had worked marvels on her bearing, had given her a feeling of assurance and a sense of belonging to the well-dressed multitude. So her clothing has conferred on her the upper class and has made her feel included now instead of being excluded. She was very hungry. Another time she would have stilled the cravings for food until reaching her home, where she would have brewed herself a cup of tea and taken a snack of anything that was available. But the impulse that was guiding her would not suffer her to entertain any such thought. So normally she would have denied herself and would have waited. So she's used to self-deprivation. She's used to making do, usually eating at home with whatever she could find. But today, this was unacceptable. There was a restaurant at the corner. She had never entered its doors. From the outside, she had sometimes caught a glimpse of spotless damask and shining crystal and soft-stepping waiters serving people of fashion. When she entered, her appearance created no surprise, no consternation, as she had half feared it might. She seated herself at a small table alone, and an attentive waiter at once approached to take her order. She did not want a profusion. She didn't want a lot. It says a profusion's an abundance of great quality, right? So she came in, and she was afraid that everyone was going to stare at her. She wouldn't be welcome. But nobody was surprised. Everybody, accepted that she belonged there. So she sat by herself at the table. So it says she didn't want a lot, though. She craved a nice and tasty bite. A half-dozen blue points, those are oysters. A plump chop with cress, that's a type of salad. And something sweet, a creme frappe, or milkshake, for instance. And a glass of Rhine wine, and after all, a small cup of black coffee. So she says she doesn't want a lot of food. She just wants a little bite. But then she gets 6 oysters, a pork chop with salad, and a dessert with wine and coffee. So this could go back again to this idea of consumerism and that it's never satisfied, right? So she bought the stockings, but the stockings weren't enough. So she bought the shoes, and the shoes aren't enough. And then she bought the gloves, and the gloves aren't enough. And so she is hungry, so she's gone to a nice restaurant, and she's ordered a rather large meal. But does that satisfy her? While waiting to be served, she removed her gloves very leisurely and laid them beside her. When she picked up a magazine and glanced through it, cutting the pages with a blunt edge of her knife. So when you used to buy a book or a magazine, you had to cut the pages open to read it because they were folded on themselves. I've included a little YouTube video. It's like 1 minute here if you'd like to click and see a book that has uncut pages and see how the pages are cut. So her magazine had uncut pages, and to read it, you have to cut. It was all very agreeable. The damask was even more spotless than it had seemed through the window, and the crystal more sparkling. There were quiet ladies and gentlemen who did not notice her, lunching at small tables like her own. A soft, pleasing strain of music could be heard, and a gentle breeze was blowing through the window. She tasted a bite, and she read a word or two, and she sipped the amber wine, and wiggled her toes in the silk stockings. The price of it made no difference. So we have this beautiful moment of peace and rest, quietness, gentleness, softness, which I'm sure is quite a paradox from living in a house with 4 or more children. We know 2 children have names, and then she says, and the boys, so it's a minimum of 4 children, maybe more. But here she's with quiet people, enjoying music, reading her book, eating her food, and having a moment. She counted the money out to the waiter and left an extra coin on his tray, whereupon he bowed before her as before a princess of royal blood. So again, we have another male here who's looking at her, and so subverting that male gaze, which he sees her as being wealthy or a princess. And now this image kind of feeds back to that image at the top of the story when she was offered the silk stockings and she smiled, thinking of it as close to her as a tiara. So at the beginning of the story, it seemed unattainable, like a diamond tiara, and now she is a princess of royal blood. There was still money in her purse, and her temptation presented itself in the shape of a matinee poster, her next temptation. It was a little later when she entered the theater. The play had begun, and the house seemed to be packed, but there were vacant seats here and there, and into one of them she was ushered, between brilliantly dressed women who had gone there to kill time and eat candy and display their gaudy attire. So she's this hard-working woman who's thought every moment of her family and her children, and when she goes shopping, it's only to get their necessities and stretch that money as much as she can. And now she's sitting next to women who don't work, who are killing time in the middle of the day, wearing gaudy clothing and eating candy. Okay, so very much a different life. There were many others who were there solely for the play and acting. It is safe to say there was no one present who bore quite the attitude which Mrs. Summers did to her surroundings. She gathered in the whole stage and players and people in one wide impression and absorbed it and enjoyed it. She laughed at the comedy and wept, and she and the gaudy woman next to her wept over the tragedy. And they talked a little together over it, and the gaudy woman wiped her eyes and sniffled on a tiny square of filmy perfumed lace, and passed little Mrs. Summers her box of candy. All right, so Mrs. Summers, again, the progression. She's gone from being excluded by her neighbors and talked about to being admitted in the restaurant. Nobody looked sideways at her or anything, but also she was sitting by herself, to being included in the theater. So the woman next to her includes her and they talk together. And so she has gone from being outside of society to being included in society, to the point of even sharing candy with a stranger. Okay? So showing that they're equals. The play was over. The music ceased. The crowd filed out. It was like a dream ended. People scattered in all directions. Mrs. Summers went to the corner and waited for the cable car. A man with keen eyes who sat opposite to her seemed to like the study of her small, pale face. It puzzled him to decipher what he saw there. In truth, he saw nothing. So another man who's looking at her, trying to figure her out, judge her from the outsides, from what they see. But really he can't understand her. It even says he has keen eyes, which keen is like he's very aware, but he still doesn't understand. And we're back to having a pale face, so our red cheeks are gone. In truth, he saw nothing, unless he were wizard enough to detect a poignant wish, a powerful longing that the cable car would never stop anywhere, but go on and on with her forever. So her afternoon of escapism, it can't last, it doesn't last. She has to return to her domestic responsibilities. So it was an illusion of freedom. She was able to purchase this illusion for a moment, but then it would pass. So if we think again about these women who are stuck in this idea of the angel in the hearth, and that a human being needs outlets, and they need connection, and they need like a sense of belonging. And the image of the angel has her separated from everyone and a servant. And even her consumerism and escapism, her approximately $500, was only a temporary fix for this. And that is a pair of silk stockings.